So, hello, my name is Adam Bean and welcome to the 47th edition of airhacks TV. Welcome back. So first, we have lots of questions, but what I wanted to share with you, there are the two courses, Web Standards Ignite and Web Components. And what I do is, they are paid courses and they comprise lessons which are not really interesting in isolation. So therefore there is, I don't know, 68 episodes. But what I do more and more, I just publish bonus features and they are completely free. So if you like to watch, for instance, what is a polyfill, and this makes sense without watching everything. So I publish more and more content here. The same is for web components. So what I did recently, I published, how to use a date picker. What I also will do this week or next week is to publish a video about how to use a more complex data table or grid. Okay, this about that. On the courses note, good news. All courses are well booked, which is amazing. So everything will take place in March and April. And by the way, I think for 5 years right now, all courses were well booked. So there was another time where I have to cancel a course, which is very good news. And the podcast is doing well. So there are already several hundred episodes download or several hundred downloads per episode. And the recent podcast was about, a little bit history of persistence, Eclipse Link in Java E and serverless and Java. Okay, now back to the questions. So let's start with the very first one. And it's not right. The very first one is by Twitter a few minutes ago, and the question goes, how to monitor transaction on Java E servers, preferred JBoss Whitefly. I would like to know what EJB opened transactions and when it started. So on Whitefly, I recorded a video, I think it was before Java 1 last year, so around October, how to activate monitoring in Whitefly. In Payara and Glassfish, you will see the active transactions. The problem is, of course, they are changed. So you have multiple concurrent transactions. So it will be hard to catch that. So what you will see is which EJB was successful and its successful invocation of a particular EJB. So if you have a set, for instance, it will it is equal to a transaction. And what you can do, what you should know is that transaction usually means a thread of execution thread. So what you could do is, and in the green book, and I think I even wrote a blog post about that, is what you can do. You can implement an interceptor which changes the current thread name to the method name. This is actually what we do in the monitoring workshops in airhacks.com in Munich. And if you rename the current thread to the name of the method, you will see it in the stack trace. So this is what you could do. And the problem is now how to visualize that, because the transaction takes a millisecond or a few seconds, so it will immediately disappear. But you can monitor transactions in all servers, and Whitefly and Payara can do this really well. Okay, so this was the question number 0. Okay, now database authentication. Would you recommend a large company to use SSL, SSH, 2 certificates, or rather username and password for database authentication? And I have to say, all larger companies, so far, always use the principle, or no, it's called resource use on application servers, and they always used username and password. I never saw a case where they use certificates. Even now in cloud native environments, there's always username and password is used, and for instance, the passwords are stored in config maps on Kubernetes or in as a secret. And certificate is a really interesting, but I never saw it in action. So so a little bit problematic. What you have to do, of course, is you will have to redistribute the certificates somehow. Because this username and password are way easier because it's basically just a string. And if you have staged environment, you will probably have to have multiple certificates per stage. So I would say with cloud native, I see a more chance that it will take off because it is easier to attach a certificate to a volume and just attach a volume to a Docker container, for instance. So having said that, whatever I saw right now was username and password. And I'm not sure whether databases like, for instance, Postgres or MySQL even support SSH certificates. So what they support are SSH tunnels, but I don't think certificates out of the box. Okay, so next one. Any questions here? No questions here. Twitter is happy. And he asked me where to put my question. So I think this was perfect to use Twitter. So the question was already answered. Okay. Now, I just want to know, what do you think about microservices with JSF frontend? Does it make sense for you? If it does, what is your architectural suggestion? So, in general, just imagine, so then we have, of course, switch, of course, to, let's go to prime faces again, prime faces. And demo, and there is like prime faces showcase. And let's say data and data grid. And this is the source code. So the question is, let's say you are building a page for a kindergarten or school. And what you need is a table. And you have a database of pupils, and you would like to show the grid here. So if you copy and paste this, you are basically done. So your application is ready to go. So it will bind to the backend, would render the data correctly. You are set. You can easily create, or implement hook action listeners. You can sort, and you are set. So if you develop, if you can use the components, it's just a killer app. So who cares then? You say really JSF, let's say, would die or will die in 3 years. Then you can, but still, you save money now, and in 3 years you have the problem. So, but if you are planning to have a UI strategy and building something like Facebook, so I wouldn't probably use JSF right now. So the question is, do JSF make sense? Yeah, absolutely. So if you know what you are doing, JSF are just perfect. And some of my clients, some are also startups, they really love JSF because they can really quickly build admin interfaces with JSF. Now, so it makes absolute sense. If it does, what is your architectural suggestion? So the question is JSF the only UI frontend strategy? So is it, or will you really have to implement something else? So if there is no REST interface, let's assume that, then what the architecture would be, you have two packages, presentation and business, and in the presentation you put your backing beans and they access the facade. And if you get REST services, you have the resource on top of that. So this is the architectural suggestion. Okay, next one. What is your opinion about business logic data and user interface modules and Java EE? Java EE8, I wanted to say, so in Java EE. To separate wars which share the same data jar and between UI and business logic web services. So let's assume user interface is JavaScript. So then it doesn't have to be war, it can be a zip, because it could run, for instance, on how it's called, Apache web server, and the other one, the very famous HTTP server right now. So Apache or just on a web server, you can just extract that and it runs. Or one war, UI contains business logic with local HTTPs and data jar module and web services only for outer communication with other applications. So therefore, we always have two modules. One is a war with REST services and business logic, and one is a zip with just JavaScript. And why that? Because you usually get two teams building that. Okay. And what's about project organization? So what I don't get is the data jar module, because you don't need jars if you have JavaScript. And if your user interface is Java, like JavaFX, then even in this particular case, we use JSON objects or JSON communication between JavaFX and the backend. And for JavaScript, Java jars do not make any sense. Multi-modules, yeah, I kind of. So I like multi-module POM without inheritance. I just misuse. I use the POM with the type POM to build one module after the other. I never use data modules, so I don't like it because this is like shared classes between this doesn't make any sense, data modules here. And all modules in one module. So this was what I would start with. So, by the way, you have really decided now, this is an architectural choice. So what do you think, how often the UI will change and how often the business logic will change? Usually, my observation is the user interface changes more often than the backend. And in this particular case, it makes sense to have two deliverables, one for the front end and one for the backend. But let's say usually it is like data driven. So everything starts with a table and then the business logic is affected, then the user interface. Then I would just like to keep one war for everything. And how do I organize new projects? Exactly what I said. So usually 80% of my new project is one war with REST services and then a zip with JavaScript. How can two developers develop application with use local EJBs for business logic? I mean, local EJBs for business, we always have local EJBs, and you will see the organization later because someone submitted me a use case article management. So if you will see the source code, you will understand what I'm talking about this. So we have one EJB, which is the boundary. Everything else is just POJOs in the control interfaces. And this EJB is exposed via REST, and the JavaScript just consumes the REST. The application runs on one server. No separate servers for UI and BL. Okay, then you could end either two wars on one war, and in one war you have JavaScript, HTML, and CSS, and the other one is the business logic. Okay, cool. So questions here? No questions here. Oh, the Brett Tucker is here. So hello to Utah, I think. And yeah, no questions here. Perfect. So I know this is simple stuff. This is actually, nothing is simple, or even in simple projects, I try to rethink what I do over and over again, and then improve, the situation and make everything a little bit more streamlined. So there's thank you for your question. So the first question is, I'm building a new application from scratch, which is great because it's lots of fun. Just a front end and legacy Oracle DB and HR department, a big company. So they like Java EE, which is also great. They use prime faces, CDI EJB, also nice. And so I have to mention the database is all old and generally not standardized, which is actually good news. Because if I had to work with in some projects where I think is not standardized, normalized, what do you mean? In projects where it was highly normalized and it was really painful to map the objects to the tables. But if it's denormalized, it could be even easier. So what I would do is the first is to generate the persistence from a database. I have NetBeans running somewhere. So let's see. NetBeans, what you could do, let's say here, you could say new somewhere persistence entity classes from database. Persistence entity classes from database, and then choose your legacy Oracle database. I don't have installed Oracle right now. And then it will generate for each table one entity, which is a good start, or JPA entity. Okay, so something happened here. Okay, Julian Ponch had a good laugh. I don't know what you mean. He's happy or not. Okay, so how you would handle it? Generate the entities from tables and start with that, and then refine the entities. Is there a way to authenticate users from Active Directory? Yeah, there is. Most of the application servers have so-called realms, and they already support Active Directory. directory, and if not, look at Keycloak. Keycloak, and there was an older, so this is a Whitefly, and Picket Link I think is no more supported, but also Picket Link implemented the security. Yeah, they are merging. So both support Active Directory. And the next one, okay, and we use in one project, for instance, WebLogic Server, and it already supported Kerberos and Windows user. So really take a look which application server it is. Some of the application servers already have come with Active Directory realm out of the box. So and now identity preservation, audit, and authorization, that the database can record, audit, and know the actual user. So this is a somehow common requirement in insurances or sometimes banks. And what we had to do sometimes is we've wrapped the JDBC driver from Oracle, not the JDBC driver, the data source from the application server. And then we unwrapped the JDBC connection, and then you can set, I forgot the name, it's not JDBC, it's a proprietary method on Oracle or DB2. So you can actually set the actual user, or set the user information, so the database will log which user actually did what. So we did it once for Oracle and the other one, the other time for DB2. So how should the authorization to JAX-RS web service go? It just uses, JAX-RS is just a servlet, so it uses a standard Java security. So you have to decide, is it basic authentication, is it certificate, is it the form-based authentication, or the fourth one I even forgot because it was not really secure. It was like Digest, was called Digest, which was not secure at all. So this is what you can do, and it will just use the same realm, whatever. So whether you hit the application server with via servlet, JSF, or JAX-RS is exactly the same security. Everything else is servlet based. What do you use for development in a closed intranet environment? Where they won't allow internet connection, no central repo, nothing. How do you handle that? So if there is nothing, you cannot use Maven. So this is actually impossible. So what usually happens is, I never have a direct, or I rarely have a direct connection to internet. What you usually do, we have a mirror. So you will have to set up a Nexus or Apache Archiva, which is Apache Archiva, which is an open source, completely free. And this Apache Archiva or Archiva, what it does is it connects to the internet, but you can selectively say, okay, these dependencies are okay, and Maven will use this the repository manager as a mirror. So this is what you can do. Okay. So, and now I just read this and was like, what it is, and then I recognize it's not Java, it's a RIA question, which makes perfect sense. So, to all Java listeners, so what RIA can do, you can specify it like type safe additional properties to specify which component has which types, and the question is, how can providing variables to a subtree of your component hierarchy without coupling? So the idea is, I have one component, let's say table, and another component table row, and there should be no coupling between them. And thankfully, this is exactly what I showed you in the web components workshop. And to demonstrate you this is actually the example, which is also on GitHub, so it's free. So I have a post element, and I have a block element, and the block has to know the post, otherwise it won't work. So if you think about web, so what do you usually get? Let's see, there is an index HTML. So this is one custom component called block with number. The number is a attribute, and it's the same like the header has also an attribute with the slot header, and the post has an attribute slot and data title. This is also an attribute, but it's an empty one. Here, script has also an attribute source. And what it means is usually the components communicate either with attributes or they content. So there's no other way in HTML to do this. And if you look at the implementation of the elements, everything is an HTML element, and you can set attributes and properties, and usually the browser synchronize between properties and attributes. So properties is what you see in the DOM tree, and attributes is the private internal view of a JavaScript object with sometimes getters and setters, and the attributes belong to the DOM. So what the post doesn't have to know that a block exists, but the block has to know that title and the content exists. So otherwise it won't work. So it has to know we have a title and we have a content, for instance. So this is what the block has to know. So how it's implemented, that is implemented in, it looks dirty, but it's actually clean. So what happens here is I clone from the template the post, I set the header and the content, and these are attributes. So if you look at the post, there is a content and header. So it's not like I'm manipulating the internal state. The header and content is a getter and setter. This is a construct which is not available in Java, just in JavaScript. So instead of what happens here is, instead of invoking or setting the attribute value, it actually invokes set header and set content. So so this is like conceptual coupling. Of course, you have to know this is the interface of my component, and this is fine. So if you had, for instance, a Polymer component framework, you would even have a binding on the attribute level. I hope it's clear. Okay, so next one. That's a very good question. As infrastructure management and application deployment becomes easier, it means like with OpenShift or Kubernetes, becomes easier with cloud platforms, Docker, Kubernetes, and AWS and AWS. Do you foresee a near future where developers will cover all aspects of the lifecycle and operations will be a thing of the past? This is actually what I do in my current projects. So we set up so everything is automated. So the full pipeline with Java EE, it runs on OpenShift. So we have one deployment pipeline in dev, one in int, and one in prod. So we actually don't need operator anymore. So we can set to production whatever we like in seconds. But we still need operators for different purposes. For instance, we recognize that the bandwidth between the cluster and the Docker registry is not that great, so we need someone who fixes that. So I would say the tasks are a little bit different. So I don't need operator now to set up the server for me, but I need an operator who will, let's say, provide volumes or tweak the performance behind the scenes, something like this. So it's exactly the same. Like at the beginning there was separation between the name was not operators, was like deployer and developer on Java EE application servers, and then developers took over. So there were no roles. It was like a DevOps on application servers, but we still need administrator to set up the Linux box. So this is like what will happen, I think, or not will happen. It's already there. And this is great. So I got now from Monsieur Zorchitz two examples. He prepared something. An example with DeltaSpike data and without. And I just opened that, and it was beautiful code, Java EE code, very simple. So let's look at this. So what I just did, I have two projects. And I just renamed that. So one is Article Management DS, and the other one is without DS, and DS is DeltaSpike. And he asked me why the deployment of DeltaSpike was slower than without. And what I did, I profiled the server, and what I found out in DeltaSpike, more reflection is going on, and this would slow down the deployment on Payara. Not significantly, but a little bit. And now it was interesting because you have direct comparison between the repository pattern and without. So this is the nice example. So this is like this is the local EJB, so what we had earlier. So this is article service, and I just modified a little bit because I was able to simplify that. So without DeltaSpike, it will look like this: article service with injected entity manager, and you can directly work with the entity manager. The resource cares about exporting this to the outside world, and the entity is just the data. So this is a perfect example for CRUD, so really like it. And the JAX-RS configuration just exposes with resources. Okay, now take a look at DeltaSpike. So first, the entity manager is exposed via producers in order to be injected via @inject. We don't need it here, but it's here. Then the boundary, we have the articles resource, but then we have a DAO. I will put the DAO here. This is the only thing I have. So, and this is repository abstract class article repository extends abstract entity repository with article and long, and it generates the CRUD. And then we get the entity. And we have two more dependencies. So, and so if we switch to the example, and I build that, and let's now go to the plane. If you take a look at that, you see the article management are 7K. Now, if you go to the DS example, this is 1 meg almost. So it's 100 times bigger. And of course, the class has to be parsed, and because of the generation, so the repository is an abstract class, and the implementation has to be created. What I saw just in the profiler is that it reported that there's refraction stuff going on, and this at deployment time, and this is what caused the performance. And of course, the implementation needs to be generated. So, and now you have to do the nice case, a direct comparison between a plain code and DeltaSpike code with repository pattern. The question is, is it really worth to use DeltaSpike or this? So it really depends on the project. If you just have CRUD for everything, DeltaSpike could be interesting. So the answer is what I did, I just wanted to repeat that, but this is a little bit tricky because I had to shut down the application server to take 10 minutes to show you this. But what I did is I just attached JVisual VM with a sampler, and then deployed the application, shut everything down, deployed again, and compare both results. And DS was a little bit slower, just a little bit, because there was some reflection going on. And you even notice with Docker, so if we go here and say maven clean install, this is now the and let's say article management dot. So this is the performance of, oh, my Docker is not running, so I forgot to start it. I rebooted the machine before the show. So it would be this a little bit slower because 1 meg has to be uploaded to Docker, and the other one is just 8K. So thank you for the example. It's really nice and easy to understand. So how to persist multiple entities at the same time or in parallel way with JPA. So if you multiple entities at the same time is the same. So and I mean at the same time always happens in serial way, and in parallel what in parallel means is that you are starting thread. So this is a more problematic because the entity manager can become inconsistent. But what you could do, you could have multiple entity managers and then, you know, per thread use one, per transaction one. So it would split the transaction to three independent transactions, and then you can do it. Okay. Then I got a question on Twitter, and this was how to handle transaction timeout on unpredictable wrong-running tests at managed bean methods. So, should I do not support transactions at all? Should I fire a CDI event and work on the task at another class? I'm not sure what would be the best approach. So, I mean, if you have unpredictable long-running tasks, so forget transactions, you cannot use transactions, block everything for 2 hours. So it already means you cannot wait for that. Just imagine you have user interface and you will have to wait 2 hours until something happens. So it just cannot be. So you will have to split it in subtasks. And what each subtask does is it does a part of that. And if it's done, you proceed. And this is hard to explain because what you need is some, you know, business background. So for instance, if I will book a flight and I book the flight, then I will book the hotel and don't attempt to book the flight and book the hotel at the same time. So this would be the difference. And the idea was the CDI event is not that bad because with that we are almost at Saga pattern. I just learned there is a Saga transaction pattern. And what the Saga transaction says is exactly this. It is just like I didn't knew that it is actually a pattern called Saga. This is like you have a local transactions and then event the next one, event the next one. It is just natural. This is what you will do. You will have to split a main transaction in subsequent transactions. And the problem then is, of course, you will have to have a compensative transactions for each sub-transactions, which will significantly increase the complexity. So so just Saga is not a best practice; it's just a workaround. If a distributed transactions does not work properly, or it just takes too long. Okay. So if something takes longer than 30 seconds, is no more local transaction, you will have to split it. And how to split it, you will have to understand the business logic first, think about compensative transactions, and then you can use CDI events or not. So, there are new questions. So let's see. I have a custom authentication filter that implements container request filter and sets security context. I can easily access this user in each REST. Okay, context, security context, how can I integrate with DGBs? So with the DGBs, we added already. It is not enough to set the security context. You will have to use a realm or you have to proper authenticate and take a look at Soteria. So the answer would be Soteria JSR, I think 375. And there are lots of examples. And the cool story is Soteria is Java 8, but it also works on Java 7 server, so you could use it right now. And there is somewhere there are tests, and the test comes with lots of examples. So take a look at this, and there is security context auth, for instance. So take a look at the example. Okay. I mean, yeah, this already solved it with Soteria. Yeah, so this extension, and there's, I think it's called HTTP authentication mechanism. So you can set it and then it is available until EGBs. What do you recommend for authentication over SSL, TLS, or auth on JWT? Why is it a bad idea to resend the password on each request? I mean, it's not a bad idea, because if you look at OAuth 2 or JWT, you don't sending a password, you are sending a token, which is the proxy of your password. So why they are doing this? Because you can keep the token and password separated, so you can use your password to log into your admin interface and then revoke the token or delete the token. And this is just this indirection. So you can use the password. Actually, we use that also in the past. With JWT, it is better because there is a decoupling. So you can just, issue as many tokens you like for different applications and then decide, which token should die and which should be renewed, for instance. And what is your checklist to have when writing code on both client and servers? Credit card information. So you cannot have a checklist. Checklist will be provided for you. So if you have to implement credit card processing, I forget there is a standard. There's a certification party which will which come and review the code. I forgot actually the name. And so then you will get a checklist from them. And I think as a good starting point is the OWASP. It is so you will find a lot of checklists here, and this is a general website to start a great website. How to deal with security in the web context. This is my general go-to, and if I'm working with clients, all my clients have a kind of security department, and the security department classifies usually the apps, and then I can ask how sensitive is the data, and then give me some advice about that. So what do you think about the next one? So let's see what happens here. So questions? Perfect. Yeah, and I'm not sure, Bartos, but I think the last time I'd even show you some source code. If not, I will probably implement something or create a screencast with this HTTP authentication mechanism. Either I showed it at the airhacks.com or the Lex Airhacks TV, but if not, I will prepare probably a short screencast to show you how it works. But it's something like HTTP authentication mechanism. Take a look at that. Yeah. Hello, Brett. Okay. So what do you think about NetBeans future? So I still like NetBeans. The funny stuff is recently someone asked me to help them, to set up a Java projects with IntelliJ. So they really like to use IntelliJ. And I actually found always the first step is the hardest. So I created the Glassfish, and there's like general Glassfish or Payara or Whitefly configuration. And then I will always forget is in the right upper corner. You have to use project configuration to add the project to the server, and I spent, I think, half an hour, to try to find this configuration. And in NetBeans, you just go to projects and push run, and it asks you, I don't know what do you mean. There is no server set up, so you choose the server and you're ready to go. So NetBeans is really nice to start with, and really easy to use, and really nice for beginners. And IntelliJ, you have to invest some more time. So having said that, in Apache they're a little bit slow with the releases. The problem is, of course, they need some committers, and I shouldn't complain rather than commit. I know it, but I have absolutely no time. And current solution is not good for open LibreOffice. Yeah, I think NetBeans, the future should be bright. Whether it is bright or not, it really depends on us developers. So the question is, who will use NetBeans in the wild still? And if it's used a lot, the plugin ecosystem will grow and the future will be bright. So if NetBeans will die, I will probably take a look at Visual Studio Code or IntelliJ, one of both. And I already saw that Eclipse also improved a lot recently, so you don't have to download several plugins to implement a small Maven project. So I will probably try Eclipse as well. But right now I still use NetBeans. I'm happy with it, and I hope the future is going to be bright. Yeah. So someone follows my warning that data transfer objects are widely overused. They absolutely are. And they have several hundred applications, different EAR files, call most of them very remote on the same EGB. And they skip DTOs, and then they get on the client, cannot locate runtime code base. And we had something similar problem with Toplink. or Eclipse link back then. And so what you can do is I think you also have top link because there's the weaving. So you can swap weaving to static, so it will enhance the code, or dynamic. And what we did at the end, it was 10 years ago. But you will have to play with the weaving, and what you will have to do on the client needs the code base. Back then it was Eclipse link, or at least some JPA annotations, because the entity travels with JPA annotations. This is the first problem, and the next problem is the entity travels with JPA annotations. The next problem is of course that if there are dynamic classes weaved in, and the question is why? Because of lazy loading. So if you have lazy loading collections, for instance, there is no, what happens then is on the first hit, the collection gets preloaded, and what Eclipse link or top link or Hibernate have to do, they have to change the code, and if they change the bytecode and the bytecode is not available on the client, then you are in trouble. But we make it work. It was a fat client, Eclipse RCP with Glassfish back then, and it worked. So you will have to enhance the client's class path and add at least JPA annotations, and then try to use, I guess we used static weaving, and back then it was there was an untask, but later there was a property on the persistence XML. Okay, so I hope all questions are answered. Let's see. No, there's the last one. There's with columns ID and name. Name is annotated as column. There's a rest with inject session bin. Pause sender. So flash, if you invoke flash, what happens then? The exception happens earlier. So flash, I have to think about this. I don't even get what the question is. So we have ID and name, and the column is unique. And there's a REST resource with injects session bin, which this does not matter with the session bin. So post means the ID is generated on the server side. So it means nothing will happen, because post mean EM persist, but it also means that the key is generated on the server. Put would mean this is a business key. I think it should be put, not post. And the goal is to throw business exception from the session bin when constraint violation happens. So EM flash or persist will both cause it, and then you can throw web application exception. Yeah, this wouldn't be a race condition because you are in the same transaction. So if you find the object and then save it, you have the reference, and then the reference is stored, so there will be no race condition. And the race condition can happen anyway, because in a short amount of time you get the value in memory. So usually you should use optimistic locks. Okay, now I think we covered everything. So then, thank you for watching, and see you in March, so in spring. And in March we have airhacks.com, so see you at airhacks and conferences. And tomorrow I'm in Rotterdam at CGI, and a company. It's a free event about cloud native Java, so I will probably hack something on stage. Why probably? I have no slides prepared, so what I can do, I can show some source code. So thank you for watching, and bye.